Who was the best guys at just
Education is everything.
who was the best guys at taking a plan and just executing?
I don't think it's about the guys who were the best at taking a plan and executing. I think it was the guys who were the best at taking a plan, understanding the intention, and then being able to change the plan in real time on a given day to make it better. And the best guy, I think, in the world at doing that, the most confident, was probably Michael Berry.
Interesting. Because we're fascinated in sport with winners. Like,
Yeah.
Pogacar, I spoke to Dan Martin on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, another one of your riders. And these guys are immortalized for their wins. Like you take Dan, like his Liège, Lombardy, his Grand Tour stages, you're immortalized. But the gap between winning and second place, it's so absolutely tiny, but none of us ever remember the second place in these stages. Like,
that's right.
What is that X factor? Like when you've been around so many riders, you've seen so many of these great champions, but you've also seen so many of the riders who didn't quite materialize that potential. Can we call, like the French call it the je ne sais quoi or something? Like, what is it?
Yeah, I call it fun. I call it play. I call it those things because those athletes who were wholly enjoying the process, despite the stress and anxiety that gets to all of us, but that fundamentally more times than not really had enjoyment. Those were the guys who, when talented, had long-term success because they weren't grading themselves on one outcome. They were grading themselves on many different outcomes. And so they could leave a race having lost while frustrated at the loss, equally proud and happy about all the other things that went right.
But isn't that a great analysis for all of us to take into our lives about balance? Because if I'd use that analogy of a ship. If you have a ship and you have one compartment and it starts to take on water, the ship quickly loses buoyancy and it'll sink. If you're a ship with multiple self-contained buoyant compartments, your work life can be going quite bad. And it's not like you have a bad life because your relationship is still going well. Your sport is still going well. Your spirituality is still going well. Your link with your community is still going well.
Yeah. And these different, buoys can hold us up at different times when something else isn't working. That same, analogy works with the people in our lives and how we hold one another up, because none of us are going to be good on any given day. But as a whole, hopefully that we can all make progress together. And this is where teams and, that balance of having self-reliance and ownership, ironically, is also knowing when you need to ask for help.
Let's take a little bit of a right turn because you've built, one of the defining companies in sports nutrition in Scratch Labs. What do you make of the modern state of cycling nutrition? Because it's changed a lot in the last 10 years. We're seeing amateurs now trying to push 120, 140 grams of carbs per hour. What do you make of that evolution, and is it all positive?
Yeah, I think it's positive in so much that the more that athletes consume, the better their brains work. And maybe that a lot of this nutrition is not about fueling muscles, but it's unlocking the governor that is our central nervous system. And whenever our brain feels like it's in danger, and hypoglycemia is certainly one of those cases, so is heat stress, so is this excessive buildup of, say, lactic acid. It may not be that fatigue is all peripherally mediated. There may be a lot of central mechanisms to fatigue. And if we're more aware at a given time and point, it's not that it's anything more than we've got better brains in sport, right? And that's what allows us to push harder. I love it. I love that, we're getting away from this idea of having to maximize power to weight, especially in the midst of racing. Now, that still may happen in a training block or a training phase as athletes are trying to hit the razor's edge of performance. But I think that I'm even seeing this trend right now where athletes understand that when they're going through a training block, that they adapt better when they are a little heavier to that training block. And then the only time that they can really make weight is when they're recovering and resting.
Yeah, the point you have on the brain is super interesting. And even anecdotally, I rode the mountain bike last weekend on quite a technical trail I hadn't ridden before. So I fueled so bad on it because I just couldn't get my hands off the bars. I hadn't got the skills.
Yeah,
And I noticed on like the fourth or fifth lap on this, my decision making was gone. Like
yeah, it's
muscularly
bad.
fatigued, I didn't feel that bad. But my decision making, like a gap that I could get through no problems on lap one, I'm like clipping shoulders going through these trees and everything. It was
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, yeah, it's bad. Yeah. So, I think that it's not only that athletes are better informed, but their whole teams and their organizations are better informed in a way that helps them logistically execute this stuff because it's not easy to do the logistics of feeding in the middle of a bike race, especially when you get to more technical gravel, mountain bike related things. So, like, marathon is going to be very different than, say, the Olympic mountain bike races.
What's the interaction between fueling with carbohydrates and hydration levels? I'm thinking even on the bike and off the bike. Is there effect on our hunger levels, on ghrelin when we're less than optimally hydrated?
I don't know. Maybe. I'm not well informed there, but I do know that there are three fundamental things that we're always trying to get right. We're trying to get the water right. We're trying to get the amount of sodium right. We're trying to get the amount of carbohydrate right. Carbohydrate is dependent upon the energy expenditure, and whether it's cold or hot, energy expenditures are probably similar. And so let's just say that carbohydrate amount stays the same. But as amount stays the same, the water and the sodium need goes up or down depending upon the temperature. And so now the concentration of carbohydrate changes because we might need more water and more sodium when it's hot out. And we might need less water and sodium when it's cooler out. And so what I've kind of taken to doing is no matter what type of liquid an athlete is consuming, we hold the concentration of sodium the same. And that needs to be equivalent to the amount of sodium that they lose in their sweat. Easy. And that helps to regulate then thirst mechanism. If you get the sodium, if you know the sodium sweat and you get the sodium concentration right in whatever they drink, then thirst becomes a really, really good mechanism for maintaining both electrolyte balance as well as water balance. When you don't get it right, say you're just drinking plain water, your thirst mechanism will first and foremost maintain electrolyte balance over water balance. Because there's not as much salt in the system, your thirst mechanism will, by de facto, get you to stop drinking once there is sodium balance in your blood. Once you replace enough water in your brain,
Interesting.
the sodium concentration back. But it will stop you from drinking up to the amount of water you've lost because there's not as much salt in the pool. So if you add more salt back, then your thirst will continue to drive up, and now you're in water balance and an electrolyte balance. And so this old school notion that thirst doesn't work for maintaining hydration is correct on one hand because it doesn't prioritize water balance, but it's incorrect in another way in that your thirst mechanism is keeping you alive by not allowing you to become hyponatremic.
So, as an amateur athlete, how do I or do listeners test that salt expenditure?
Very simply, you weigh yourself before and after exercise. And if you're more than, say, 3% body weight loss, instead of trying to force yourself to drink more the next day, incrementally add more sodium to what you're drinking. Then go out and ride and drink by thirst. Weigh yourself again. And if you have lost less water weight, you're on track. And keep on increasing that increment into a point where you're not losing, say, more than 2% of your body weight.
So,
So
so what would your starting point be for sodium content? And then what increments would you go up in?
my starting point would probably be, you see a range across the population as low as 400 milligrams of sodium per liter to as high as 2,000. So maybe start at 400 and go up by 200 milligram increments. And most people will fall somewhere between 800 and 1,000. But some people might not actually get to the right level until they hit 1,600 or 1,800 milligrams of sodium per liter of fluid consumed. So very, very simple experiment. And because there is so much variability, there's not a one size fits all. In fact, if you were to look at the genotypic traits and the phenotypic traits that are most variable across the human species, sodium, sweat, both at the genotypic level with the CF1 gene set, which is what controls sodium sweat, as well as the amount of salt that we end up seeing lost by different human beings, is amongst the top 3 most variable things, more variable than, eye color, height, body size, shape, etc.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video. I know that you're absolutely going to miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.